Hey guys, Shindig here. So today we're going to be looking at tier sets, and in particular, comparing the power levels of Togc set bonuses, or tier 9, among DPS classes. For a bit of context, I stumbled across this idea while playing Dragonflight. I was impressed with how readily available information on tier sets was. For example, I can fairly easily find out how much of a DPS gain any class gets from their tier sets, just through a quick Google search. Here's one such website. But this isn't true for Wrath of the Lich King. I tried reaching out to a few class discords to see if there were values they could share when I was compiling this information, but the response I got was the same in each discord, and that was to just sim it. Which is honestly a good answer in most situations, especially if you're concerned with one specific specialization. The best and most accurate answer is always to sim. Because exactly how much an upgrade will benefit one person depends on that person's current gear setup, consumes, playstyle, etc. All or most of which can be addressed in a sim. But doing this for every specialization is a big ask, and I believe that if this information could be made readily available, it could lead to more constructive discussions. Which brings us here. So I took it upon myself to go through and sim the tier set bonus for every damage dealing spec in the game as a percent DPS increase. Now to avoid keeping the intro too long, I'll discuss the methods I used later in the video, but know that for about 90% of DPS specializations we'll cover, I simmed using WowSims, which I'll leave a link to below. All the values we'll discuss were simmed for a 3-minute single target Patrick style of encounter in that specialization's phase 3 bis. There are a few exceptions that I'll get to later, but otherwise these were the parameters for every sim. So I've set up the tier list in the following manner. Healers and tanks on the bottom, and the tiers themselves are distinguished by the percent DPS gain a class receives from their tier set bonuses. This means both the 2 and 4 set bonuses for each specialization have been taken into consideration when placing it in one of the rows. So let's get started. In no particular order, I suppose we start with Rogue. So Rogue has 3 DPS specializations, 2 of which are powerful rating specs, and subtlety being the meme spec, in the sense that it does significantly less damage than the other 2 specializations. But for completion, we've included it here. The set bonuses are the same for each specialization, and I'll throw it on screen somewhere here. So how well do these set bonuses sim? Combat gains about 0.5% from the 2 set bonus, and roughly 0.7% from the 4 set bonus, which slots it into the 1 to 2% DPS row, meaning it's not good. Now, Rupture is the main damage dealing spender for combat, however the extremely low proc chance combined with the ICD means it doesn't proc much, and the proc itself isn't very helpful. Combat is all about planning ahead to maintain your spenders like Slice and Dice, Rupture, EA, so playing your rotation well implies you budget just enough energy to maintain these spenders. Hence, these procs aren't really going anywhere useful apart from becoming a free Sinister Strike, which already doesn't do much damage for the combat damage profile, considering the majority of damage dealt is through auto hits and poison damage. This tier set does, however, do more for combat than it does for assassination, which lands itself in the less than 1% DPS gain section. This is because assassination rogues don't use Rupture in full bis. There are setups where using Rupture can be a DPS increase, especially if you're coming into TOGC without 252 gear from Ulduar, or the previous phase's bis. But even so, most of the fights in TOGC have some element of cleave. So a hybrid assassination combat build running Blade Flurry will be a greater benefit to your damage profile, which implies not using Rupture because Rupture doesn't cleave. The 4 set is also bad. It's the same song as combat, where your builder makes up such a small amount of your overall damage profile that the additional crit doesn't contribute much. So the 2 set bonus does nothing, and the 4 set bonus is about a 0.8% DPS increase. Then we have Sub-Rogue, specifically the Hemo Rogue build. From what I could find, playing Shadow Dance is equivalently strong, but I couldn't find as much information on it, so I went with the Hemo build. That said, if you're playing Sub, you're probably just PvP spec and don't care about doing damage to rate anyways, but for the sake of completion, Sub-Rogue gains just over 0.8% from both set bonuses. Unlike Assassination, they do use Rupture, hence they come out at a marginally higher percent DPS gain. Alright, we've set the bar low, but moving on from one meme spec to another, albeit a more popular one, we have Blood DK. Now, similar to Rogue, all 3 DK DPS specializations use the same tier set. So for our Blood DK believers, this works out to a 1.2% DPS increase from the 2 set bonus, and a 1.7% DPS increase from the 4 set bonus, which brings the total percent DPS contribution to being just shy of 3%. Frost DKs get a little bit less from their set bonuses when compared with Blood. I imagine part of this is because Bloodstrike isn't particularly a high priority ability, so they lose out on potential uptime from their 2 set bonus, especially when compared with a Blood DK that's just slamming Heartstrike. Perhaps the strength scales better with blood, but regardless, the 2-set bonus for Frost seems to be about 0.7%, and the 4-set bonus is the same as Blood Decay at a 1.7% DPS gain, hence putting them right around the 2.5% mark and below Blood Decay. Now, Unholy Decays are pressing Blood Strike more frequently and seem to get more value from their 2-set bonus than Frost, as it's simming to be about a 1.4% DPS increase with the 2-set. The 4-set, however, and this was a surprising result, only seems to be roughly a 2% DPS increase. I say this knowing full well that the Unholy DK 4-piece has been hyped to the moon and back. I mean, they don't replace their tier set for the rest of the game. Now, if it were an AoE sim, this number would be significantly higher due to the Unholy DK's ability to spread diseases through Pestilence. Critting Blood Plague will do absolute work in AoE, but in single target, it remains a respectable 2.1% DPS increase. This puts Unholy DK at roughly a 3.5% gain, and in the middle of the 3 to 4% DPS increase range. Next up, we have our Druid classes. Now, the Boomkin set bonuses go absolutely crazy. The 2-set allows Moonfire dots to crit. We also saw a similar set bonus from the Unholy DK 4-set, and you'll notice as we move through the set bonuses, classes that get a dot now crits set bonus are seriously reaping the benefits. This type of set bonus is, at a minimum, a 2% DPS gain for most classes, which is crazy. Both the rogue set bonuses can't even imagine half that, which both shows how good of a set bonus this is and how bad the rogue tier is. For the Boom Chicken, this amounts to around a 2.1% DPS increase, and this is taking into account the change in talents and glyphs a balanced Druid would take when acquiring their 2-set. The 4-set then is bonkers. Like, let's just slap a 4% damage modifier on their most used abilities. This works out to a massive 3% damage increase from the 4-set bonus alone, which is more damage than every spec we've covered so far. Starfire, Wrath, and Moonfire make up at least 80% of their overall damage in single target, making their tier contribution the most directionally proportional to their damage. Putting the set bonuses together, Balanced Druids gain a whopping 5% increase in damage from their tier, landing them at the top of our ranking. Next we have Feral. Feral is one of the classes I know the least about, but what I found was that they gain roughly 1.4% damage from their 2-set bonus, and about half that amount from their 4-set. The 4-set bonus is unsurprising. Adding a % crit modifier to a spender that's not their main damage source doesn't generally bode well. Case in point, rogues. The 2-set contributing as much as it does, however, was surprising. The 3 extra seconds of Rake seems to be quite good for Feral. Both set bonuses give the Feral a 2% damage increase, which is enough to slide it into the bottom of the 2 to 3% damage range. Next up, we've got our Hunters. I'll cover Survival and Marksman at the same time, since the set bonuses affect them similarly. Now, if you recall my comments about set bonuses that allow dots to crit being OP, this is a prime example of that. Because it turns out that Serpent Sting being able to critical strike results in the most powerful set bonus in the entire tier. Survival Hunter gains 3.2% damage, and Marksman gains 3.4% damage from this set bonus alone, placing Marksman and Survival on the throne with the first and second most damaging set bonuses per DPS specialization of the current tier. I imagine Marksman takes the slight edge here due to several of their talents buffing the damage of Serpent Sting. Following the 2-set bonus, the 4-set is remarkably underwhelming. Both Marksman and Survival gain about 0.35% damage. This means Marksmanship finds itself at the high end of the 3 to 4% range, and Survival falls just shy of it. Then we have BM Hunters. Being a meme spec, I had a difficult time finding information on the 2-set bonus. There was no BM Hunter preset I could sim, nor BIS I could find. Hence, I had to use different means to acquire some meaningful numbers. I'll cover the method I used to find this information in more detail later, but by sampling data from Warcraft logs, I was able to approximate the DPS gain from the 2-set bonus to work out to roughly a 2.6% DPS increase, and the 4-set bonus to be about a 1.3% DPS increase. Unfortunately, I was working with a small sample size. I only found 3 logs of BM Hunters that actually had their 4-set at all. For the 4-set itself, I assume the benefit from the set bonus scales linearly with pet damage, and since we know how much a set bonus contributes to marksmanship and survival, I multiplied by a factor of the average amount of pet damage a BM Hunter does, more than a marksmanship hunter or a survival hunter, and that number ended up being about 3. Thus, we're very loosely saying BM Hunters gain roughly a 1.3% DPS increase from their 4-set bonus. I think this is a fairly conservative number, since I'm ignoring all the potential BM talent modifiers that may cause their damage to scale multiplicatively with the 4-set bonus. But after that hand-wavy explanation, the BM Hunter ends up sitting barely shy of the 4 to 5% range at 3.9% DPS gain. That said, because it's kind of hype, that BM Hunter tier is popping off, and in my opinion, I think the set bonus likely does more for BM than I've made it out to do. We're going to bump it up into the 4 to 5% tier and call it good. Next, we move on to Mage. Mages share the same set bonuses across all DPS specializations as shown on screen here. It's worth mentioning I use a different sim for the Arcane and Fire specs at the recommendation of the good people over in the Mage Discord, which I'll leave a link to down below if you want to check it out. Supposedly, the Mage section on WoW Sims isn't up to date. Having used the Mage sim, I can testify to both its rigor and to mages being some of the most sweaty players playing Wrath. But regardless, these Mage set bonuses have been the hot talk this phase. But are they really that good? The answer is yes, they definitely are. Starting with Arcane, mana equals damage. So having an extra 10% mana regen is huge for their 2-set bonus, and it gets them an extra 1.8% damage. The 4-set crit modifier is also big, considering Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles make up a moderate 99% of their damage profile. The 4-set bonus grants them 2.8% additional damage, which puts them at a total 4.6% damage from this tier. Good enough to take second place in our tier set ranking so far. Then regarding Fire, this class loves Critical Strike. More heating up procs equals more damage. The 2-set bonus is roughly a flat 3% increased critical strike chance to all abilities in Fullbiss, which translates to 2.3% increased damage. And the 4-set grants them an extra 5% critical strike to Fireball, which equals more Pyroblasts. This sims out to increase their damage by 3.1%, putting their total to 5.4% from both set bonuses and moving them into the #1 spot on our list. Now, it's worth noting that I've avoided discussing the DPS gain as a value during this video rather than a percent, because many of the WoW Sims class and specialization sections are maintained and updated independently. So I expect there to be some variance in the DPS values I'm simming while building this sheet. This is why I've only addressed the amount of DPS gain as a percent modifier, since it allows me to eliminate some of the variance I may have using the different class sim tools. What this means, for example, is although BM is well above Survival in these rankings, Survival's set bonus actually nets them a higher DPS gain than BM, because Survival does so much more damage than BM, despite BM's tier netting them a larger percent increase. However, if we throw caution to the wind and ignore all that, Fire Mage also comes out on top as getting the most in raw damage, simming to a net increase of about 670 DPS. It's worth giving an honorable mention to Frostfire. They also gain a significant amount of damage from their tier set. It would be enough to place them in between Fire Mage and Boomkin on our tier list, but I do not have an icon for them, so they will remain off the list. Lastly, for mages, we have Frost, which should under no circumstances be used for raiding, but if you do happen to find yourself in said situation, the Frost set bonuses net you a 3.2% DPS increase, which slots it towards the bottom of the 3 to 4% range. Moving on then to Ret Paladin. This was another one of the exceptions to my WoW Sims process. In this case, it was because the Ret Paladin Discord had this information readily available, which I greatly appreciated. They found the 2-set to grant 290 DPS and the 4-set to give 70 DPS, which after converting to my percent DPS modifiers, showed that the Rets gain about 3.1% extra DPS from their tier. I did cross-check one of the values with the method I've been using on WoW Sims and was able to return a value within 7 DPS of the 4-set value, which is good enough for me and good enough to slot Ret Paladins into the bottom 3 to 4% tier. For Shadow Priest, the set bonuses are good. The 2-set gets them about 2.2% increased damage, and the 4-set an additional 1.5% damage, bringing the total to 3.7%, good enough to slot them just behind the Marksmanship Hunter. I don't know much about this class, but similar to Feral Druid, the additional dot length with a Vampiric Touch seems to synergize well with their class, and the extra crit on Mind Flay, their most damaging ability, is also a meaningful DPS gain. Next, we have our blue boys, starting with Elemental Shaman. Almost as if I was continuing the train of thought from Shadow Priest, the extended dot duration of Flame Shock amounts to a similarly significant 2% increased damage, and their 4-set mini Ignite dot grants them an additional 1.3%, moving them to a 3.3% damage gain total, which is good enough to edge out the Frost Mage in the 3 to 4% damage row. The enhancement set bonuses then are admittedly less good. Applying 3 points into the Static Shock talent gives the Enhancement Shaman a 6% chance to do their Lightning Orb shield as damage on an attack. This makes up a fairly minor portion of their overall damage profile, so the additional 3% here doesn't do much for them, amounting to just shy of a 1% DPS increase. The 4-set bonus is better, but not amazing, and is about twice as strong, adding just shy of 2% to their damage profile. This brings Enhanced to roughly a 2.8% DPS increase, good enough to move them in front of Frost DPS. For our final caster DPS, we have our Warlocks. Starting with Affliction, they gain the least of all the Warlock specs out of their 2-set, with their pet critical strikes amounting to 0.8% additional DPS, but they get the most out of their 4-set, with the damage modifier to their UA and Corruption having a big impact on their damage profile, coming out to an additional 2.7% damage in single target. This moves them into the middle of the 3 to 4% range, just in front of Elemental Shaman. And of course, an honorable mention is that in 2 and 3 target scenarios, this set bonus scales very nicely with their multi-dotting damage profile. Demolocks, on the other hand, gain more from their 2-set at 1.2% extra DPS, as their pet contributes a larger amount to their damage profile, but less from their 4-set, which we expect, given Immolate makes up a smaller portion of their damage profile than an Affliction Lock's Unstable Affliction and Corruption. But the 4-set still puts out a healthy 1.6% additional damage. Altogether, this puts Demo just shy of 3% additional damage, which slots it just behind Blood DK DPS. Finally, among our casters, we have our Desperlock, and this was perhaps the most surprising result in this entire sim. Desperlocks gain a nearly 5% increase in DPS from their 2-set bonuses, 1.6% of which they get from their 4-set, much like Demolocks. This makes sense since Immolate has similar value between both specs. What is remarkable, however, is that the Desperlock 2-set bonus grants them just over 3% additional DPS, which is enough to be the 3rd strongest set bonus for a DPS spec, only falling short of the Marksman and Survival Hunter 2-set bonus. So I didn't know this until running the sim, but it turns out that Desperlocks scale insanely well with their pet imp's critical strike damage. Talents like Ruin, Demonic Power, and Improved Imp all increase the imp's damage so the imp itself is popping off. Plus, with the Empowered Imp talent, it makes it so that when their imp crits, the Desperlock's next cast will be a guaranteed critical strike. So the 10% increased crit chance for the imp translates to increasing the Desperlock's critical strike chance over the course of an encounter. Now, it doesn't exactly translate to plus 10% crit on all the Desperlock's casts, but it definitely makes them crit more, and is enough for them to sit comfortably at the top of the 4 to 5% tier. If I can put them there. Finally, then, we move on to Warrior. We don't see as many Arms Warriors now as we did at the start of the expansion, but if you're still playing Arms, the good news is that your tier set is pretty good, especially among melee DPS. In particular, their 2-set bonus is very strong. Arms Warriors love Armor Pen, and since they're mainly in battle stance, this flat 6% is big value. It works out to roughly a 2.2% DPS increase. On the other hand, their 4-set bonus is okay, at about a 1.3% DPS increase. Altogether, this puts them right at 3.5% DPS gain, and just behind Unholy DK. Fury get less from their 2-set since they're primarily in Berserker stance, and the 2% crit is less valuable for the Fury Warrior than 6% Armor Pen is for the Arms Warrior. So for Fury, the 2-set bonus is about 1.6% increased damage. However, they get more value from their 4-set when compared to Arms. Heroic Strike just makes up a larger portion of their overall damage profile, and it results in them getting just shy of 2% damage from their 4-set bonus. Altogether, this puts them at around a 3.6% DPS increase, moving them ahead of Arms and just in front of Unholy DK. And that rounds out the tier list. In conclusion, we can see that the tier 9 set bonuses absolutely favor ranged DPS classes. Now, if you play a melee class, don't despair. This does not imply that ranged DPS are the superior damaging specs this phase. It's actually quite the opposite. A lot of melee specs are performing very well right now. For example, 7 of the top 10 DPS and Togc boss damage in the 90th percentile right now are melee classes. They just happen to gain less from their tier set bonuses when compared with a lot of other range classes. Anyways, if you've stuck it out to this point, thanks for watching. This video took a lot of work, but was a lot of fun to produce. I'd like to keep making similar content to this, so if you don't mind subscribing, it really helps my channel grow. The goal right now is to become a partner on YouTube, but that requires 500 subscribers, so we've definitely still got a ways to go. Now, I did say at the start of this video, I would cover some of the methods I use in more detail later on, but this video is already quite long, and to avoid making it too much longer, I'm just going to shotgun through some of the methods I used, and if you have any questions about things, feel free to drop a comment below, and I'll try to get back to it as soon as I can. So, to find these results, as mentioned, I use WoWSims to simulate the DPS gain from tier sets. In particular, in WoWSims, you have the ability to enter custom stats. So what I did is I would remove the tier from the BIS setup, then input the stats of that item, gems, and enchants into the sim, such that there was no change in the character's stats. And then I would sim the difference. as it would solely be the result of whatever the tier set bonus was providing. There were some edge cases of classes that don't run 4-piece in their BIS, or classes like BM Hunter that don't have a BIS list or even a sim page on WoW Sims, so it wasn't entirely consistent, but most classes ran 4-piece plus 1 off-piece in their BIS configuration, so I'd remove 1 piece to find the 4-set bonus, then 3 pieces to find the 2-set bonus. Doing more than 20 of these sims did take a decently long time, especially having to record and then input the stats for every piece of tier that was removed. I was able to speed up the process slightly by making an Excel sheet that would automatically add the stats together when I needed to sim the 2-set bonus, aka when I would remove 3 pieces of tier, but it was still pretty time consuming. For classes that didn't run 4-piece in their BIS, I just threw on another piece or 2 of tier so I could sim the set bonus anyways. For this reason, and as I mentioned earlier, I didn't talk much about the total DPS gain as an actual value, because classes that weren't being simmed in their BIS configuration would inherently be at a disadvantage, but the percent difference would remain unchanged. This is why BM Hunter is ranked so high, despite being a relatively low damage dealing class. Speaking of BM, this was the one spec I was unable to sim. I explained how I found the 4-set bonus when we were ranking the BM Hunter, but I didn't cover the 2-set bonus. So for the 2-set bonus, I just used Warcraft Logs data to create a weighted average of Serpent Sting hits that would crit versus average hits of those that don't crit to find the percent DPS difference. And this was actually the method I had used when I began this project until somebody in the Mage Discord actually recommended to me that I use the custom stats option in the WoW Sims tool, which was admittedly much quicker and a much better solution. The final exception then to using WoW Sims was for when I was looking at mages. The Mage Sim tool that was recommended to me, as I ended up using, is current and kept up to date, apparently unlike the Mage page on the WoW Sims website. I did still use WoW Sims for Frost Mage since there was no Frost preset in the Mage Sim, but I did use it for Fire, Arcane, and Frostfire. And I believe that covers everything. I'm planning to release a document in a few days in the description of the video that will have the results of my work posted, and I'm hoping this can kind of turn into a community-driven thing. I'm sure there are people who will be watching this video that are much smarter than I and have a much better understanding of their class, and I'd love to work together with the community to create an accurate sheet that is both precise and can be used as a resource for other players, raids, and guilds in Wrath Classic. But that's it. See ya.